Hello there, very good afternoon if you're watching us live, and hello from wherever else you are watching. Welcome for NCC Group's monthly Cyber Threat Intelligence webinar. I'm your usual host, Matt Hull. I'm the Global Head of Cyber Intelligence and Response at NCC Group. So today, what's on today's agenda? So as per usual, going to have a bit of a quick look through the ransomware stats and trends, just see what's going on in the world of ransomware. It's actually our quarterly set of reporting at the moment, so we're going to be talking about what Q1 looks like as opposed to just March. Going to take a little bit of a look back at January, February, March for everyone. A quick or a smaller, should we say, threat and vulnerability roundup than usual. We'll talk through what's going on in the big bad world, some of the news stories that I think are worth mentioning to you. Before, as we promised last time, we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive on Cyber UK. So the event that happened here in the UK last week, I didn't get to catch all of it, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But we're going to look at the lessons learned, some of the key themes that came out of that conference, what that means for us within the cybersecurity industry, what that means potentially for the threat landscape as well. I'd be lovely to get people's takes on that. And very last minute, to their surprise this morning when I pinged them on Teams, we've got a couple of wonderful guests, so we'll get those guests introduced a little bit later on when we pull them in to talk about Cyber UK. So without further ado, let's get cracking on what's going on in the big bad world of ransomware. So Q1. There's actually been an ever so slight decrease in the number of ransomware victims that we've tracked through leak sites and the other methodologies that we use in this first quarter of 2026 compared to last quarter 2025. Sorry, the first quarter 2025. Mostly because if you look at that diagram, figure 2 there, there was a big spike in activity by the Clock ransomware group early on in February last year, which led to a big old spike, and that's sort of been a little bit of an outlier and has caused a bit of interest in comparison. Without that, though, there would have been a steady increase in the number of ransomware victims in this year compared to last. In terms of your top actors, so the groups that you probably want to be keeping an eye on from their known tactics, techniques, and procedures, and IOCs and such like, if you're doing any threat hunting and those sorts of activities around ransomware or doing any red teaming type work, Killing, Akira, and the Gentleman are top of the table, so to speak, at the moment. Killing, as you can see there, is almost double the next best. Gentlemen have been rising the ranks quite quickly though over the last few months. Relatively new group. We're putting out some separate reporting about the Gentleman and doing some threat hunting activity here internally around that group at the moment as well. So keep an eye on those. No real massive difference in the top sectors that are being targeted, those economic sectors. Industrials, so that's including your manufacturing, also includes some IT services and consulting services top of the charts in terms of 30% of the number of victims that have been targeted. Consumer discretionary, as per usual, in second place. Has been a slight increase in the IT landscape, so the targeting of IT, and healthcare is still staying right up in top in terms of, or in the fourth place, sorry, in terms of victimology. Probably the one thing that I would call out though is financials. So financial services, fintech organizations, startup banks, none of the big players, I would suggest, but some of those probably less mature, those startup organizations within financial services certainly seems to be targeted a little bit more this quarter compared to previous years and months. So that's what's going on in the world of ransomware. In terms of the big bad world, I only mentioned this group back in February. So ShinyHunters, a couple of other big breaches that we've seen over the last couple of weeks of this collective, this group that is targeting some pretty big brands, big names. Top of their list at the moment, Udemy, Canada Life, ADT. The group is going after PII, essentially, so details and customer data from very significantly large databases and data sets. I shouldn't get my teeth in today, I'm sorry. So their MO, quite simply put, is leveraging the data that they've previously stolen to target other organizations. So they're using usernames, password combinations, other PII to conduct further activity. And I've mentioned this a few times in the past. What is that breach data used for when it's been exposed? Well, it's used to conduct further attacks, and ShinyHunters are leveraging that to great effect, with a view to targeting other organizations down that kill chain. And they're also monetizing that data as well. So you will have seen potentially some stuff in the news around Rockstar Games and the new Grand Theft Auto game, and some of the data that's potentially been stolen in relation to that, and the group trying to monetize that data and using that as leverage as well. But essentially, this goes back to one of those very, very basic fundamental things that I talk about all the time, is good credential hygiene and exposure management of data and assets. So not just technical controls that we need in place for things, but monitoring of breach data sets, monitoring of unusual behavior, user behavior within environments, because this is clearly leading to an awful lot of further incidents. Piet, yes, you will receive a copy of the presentation after the webinar, my friend. So yeah, if you have those capabilities in place already around breach data set monitoring, some dark web monitoring, those forums, and also data exposure, leverage it, because it's that early indicator, that early detection that you have before it hits your SOC, before it hits those other environments, those technical controls that you'll have, that could potentially really indicate whether you've got a heightened risk of being compromised by a group like ShinyHunters, for example. So do keep an eye on that. I can't sort of stress that enough. Other things that are happening. So I read in Risky Biz just before Cyber UK, in fact, the other week, some interesting takes on the AI scene. You know, what are the threats to and from AI, and in this case, large language models. There are these things called proxy routers, by all accounts, where you can put your prompts into a proxy router, a solution that's online, and it disseminates your prompt across different models, and then generates your response to those. In terms of the actual attacks or the research that's been conducted, there is some sort of man in the middle type capability, where if these routers are being used and they're not set up in the right way, there is potential to prompt inject within those routers themselves, and essentially it's kind of creating almost like a supply chain type threat or risk in between the models themselves and the user at the front end, and causing all sorts of strange and malicious responses coming back. So just something to bear in mind. Again, I've talked about shadow AI within organizations and proper AI governance within organizations is just an extra layer to consider when deploying those types of capabilities within the environment. Antonis, just keeping an eye on questions as I'm going through. Regarding the first slide, what's the source of the data regarding sector, threat actors, etc.? Internal data or consolidated? A bit of consolidation. So we're monitoring multiple leak sites. We're also leveraging things like RansomWatch to keep an eye on data that's exposed. We do our own work internally, though, to then validate what organization sits within which sector, and we use GICS as our model for recording the sectors that's in there. So it's a combination of multiple sources, then some human validation behind the scenes to confirm which sectors are actually impacted within that space. Hopefully that answers your question. The FBI came out last week with their usual sort of cybercrime economy reporting, and $20 billion is the number that they've cited this year. And that's the total amount of losses from cybercriminal activity in 2025. That's been driven obviously by the things like ransomware, other extortion campaigns, business email compromise, and similar. Pretty big number that. So organizations absolutely need to consider cybercriminality and what that means for their organizations. BEC, as I say, ransomware operations continue to be big drivers within that criminal economy. And that number is going up every single year. So it really goes to show that we need to focus our efforts on reducing the opportunity for those attackers to get into our environments and cause us problems. last thing from me is on the vulnerability intel this year. So a few very old vulnerabilities knocking about at the moment, which have landed in CISA's Kev list as being actively exploited in the wild at the moment. First one I'm pulling up here is Simple Help. So Simple Help is a sort of IT support solution, remote access capability, quite widely used by all accounts. A set of vulnerabilities from back in 2024, so not all that old, but old, have been doing the rounds, or there's certainly some exploitation of those in the wild, and CISA have raised those things as concerns. So I've just listed those there for you. I've not put it on here as well because the actual potential for the attack is probably a little less, but CISA also cited a very old Excel vulnerability, and I forgot the exact date, but it's multiple years old. I've got 2017 in my head for some reason, but very, very old vulnerability that's all of a sudden got a live active exploitation against it. It has lots of different stages to the attack though, so probably less of a concern, but an interesting one nonetheless. And then the last vulnerability I've called out for this month, just to keep an eye out, was from earlier on in the month. So you probably already picked it up by now, hopefully. But vulnerability in Fortinet, FortiClient EMS, remote code execution, active exploit in the wild with a proof of concept in GitHub at the moment. It is fixable with an upgrade to version 7.4.7, but CISA have also called this one out again as being actively exploited in the wild and leveraged by malicious actors. So just one for keeping an eye out if you are leveraging that capability within the environment. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the things that I've been spotting over the last month or so since we last spoke. But I'm going to be moving on now. Hopefully that's okay with everyone. Keep the questions coming in, please do. If we need to do a bit of a tangent, then more than happy to do that. But for the time being, I'm going to introduce two folks to the session, if they can jump on, if the tech works. Here they are.
Hello, here we are.
Hello. So we've got Kat and we've got Alessia. Kat, I think, have you been on one of these webinars with me before, or was it Ray?
Yes, talking about one of my other favorite topics, Computer Misuse Act reform. But yeah,
of course, yes, absolutely. So, ladies, would you mind introducing yourselves to me? Kat, do you want to go first? Well,
sure.
I know you. To the audience.
Hello, Matt. My name is Kat Sommer. I look after government affairs and analyst relations for NCC Group, so lead on all of our political engagement, working with UK government, policymakers, parliamentarians, likewise at EU level, and look after our analyst relationships.
Fab, thank you, Kat. Thank you, and welcome along. And then Alessia, a fresh face.
Fresh face. Absolutely. They are brilliant. Hi everyone, I'm Alessia Oliveri. I'm a lead portfolio manager at NCC, and I look after our technical assurance portfolio. So everything from pen testing all the way through to our full spectrum attack simulation efforts. So there's a fair bit of coverage there, but a new face to the TI webinar series, but a few of you sit on some of our other webinars. You've probably seen me floating around there as well.
No doubt. Thank you both for joining me. It was very last minute. I did genuinely drop these two a Teams message at like 10 o'clock this morning, and they both kindly agreed to jump on and share their knowledge of what went on at Cyber UK. So I'm going to kick things off with you, Kat, if that's okay, just to give your sort of overview of things. I know you have to keep a close eye on it, and we had the chance to speak to a couple of ministers while I was still alive and kicking and not lying on a bathroom floor. So yeah, what were your sort of views from the couple of days?
So I'm going to preface this by saying, one, I am a massive NCSC fangirl, because I think the work that they do and the way in which they've established themselves as a national technical authority is awesome. I am also genuinely in my happy place when I'm at Cyber UK, because it's very rare that you have everyone who has a role to play in UK cyber resilience in a single place. And I think that feeling of community and sort of everyone pulling in the same direction, whether it's, you know, us competitors on the the exhibition floor with our very colourful, very exciting stands, or the various government officials that run around and are there to soak up the atmosphere, do their own networking and their own thing. It's just like no other conference I've ever been to, and you walk away sort of thinking that maybe as the defenders, we do stand a chance in this ever-evolving threat landscape. So that was really, really positive. I think the other observations I have, and we had the pleasure of greeting the security minister at our centre shortly after he made his keynote speech and announced increased funding for SME cyber resilience, promoting take-up of cyber essentials, the announcement of the forthcoming cyber resilience pledge, and inviting large organisation businesses across the UK to pledge and commit publicly to investing in cybersecurity and taking cyber resilience seriously. And he just announced, basically issued an invitation to the great and the good of the Frontier AI Labs and others to help build the national scale AI powered cyber defensive capability. So that I think what comes across in a way is, one, if you look at the cyber essentials funding, there is a very clear view that doing the basics right is still fundamentally important, even as everything around us evolves and technology advances are everywhere. There is, as sort of visible in the cyber resilience pledge, that very clear message that organizations are fundamentally responsible for cyber resilience, and that it's no longer good enough to just go, oh, I just didn't know, oh, I just couldn't possibly do anything about it. And I think the important thing is that we all recognize that the actual criminals are the cyber criminals and the adversaries, but there is a very clear responsibility on organizations to do everything they can to minimize their attack surface and make the lives of criminals as hard as they possibly can. And I think that red threat in terms of NCSC and government rhetoric has been coming through quite loudly over the last couple of months, and they seem to be pretty consistent and wanting to push that message. And then obviously the AI powered stuff with kind of like the undercurrent running through, and like through a couple of side chats, there is that that feeling that the threat as such has necessarily changed, but the speed and the scale has. But in many ways, it was also an opportunity for people like NCSC or Department for Science, Innovation and Technology to get their key message across and sort of capitalize on the urgency and the buzz that's been created through things like the Mythos announcement the week before, to go, none of our basic advice has changed. What has changed is us imploring you to please, please, please finally do as we have told you to do for the last couple of years, because it is now fundamentally important for all of us to keep surviving in this digitally enabled AI-powered world. Thank you very much. And I think that's a sort of summary from my end. I'll stop talking now.
No, thank you for that. And absolute amen to some of that narrative that was coming out. I think it came out in some of the international talks as well, wasn't it? This is a case of all of us have to collectively fight against cyber criminality and those sorts of attacks. I didn't think we were going to get through the whole webinar without using the M word today, though. But there we go. Nearly got there. But yeah, thank you very much for that, Kat. What about yourself, Alessia? What were your sort of views?
I think I'd echo what Kat's mentioned there. To be honest, I think Cyber UK as a whole is a really lovely event, because you end up coming out of it being like, I have that core purpose. I remember what we're doing. We're here for this reason, and it's so empowering in that stance. But I think actually, in terms of all the plenaries, all of the talks, and going around the stands, you can really see the shift that cyber isn't, or security in general isn't necessarily envisioned as almost the cost center or the thing on the side anymore. And what we're seeing is actually the impact to the economy's growth of what that's looking like. Obviously, we've seen the attacks over the last years and a couple of years or so, and they're very high profile It's actually been picked up by publications, etc. Speaking of Jag Land Rover and M&S and whatnot. But the impact that has then gone on to have has actually almost helped shape the landscape of how organizations should be preparing. And it is more of a case of it's not an if, it's a when, and how prepared are you going to be at that point in time. And it does then come down to the concept of trust, whether that's trust in your people and actually holding the trust back to know that, yes, the precautions that you're putting in place are the right thing to do, and that you know and understand truly if something were to happen, and when it does happen, you can respond and feel that you've got yourself back to a good level of operation. And I think Kat mentioned the point around regulation, and what NCSC have kind of put in place is not about just kind of having it as a, yes, this is our compliance tick box. It cannot be the minimum anymore. It is that foundation. It is the foundation, the baseline for building that stronger lens of security. And actually, I think it was Margaret Heffernan they brought on stage for the opening plenary, and she spoke around the concept of willful blindness. And actually, it was brilliant in that respect, because it's an understanding that actually everyone has a part to play in this journey, and understanding actually if something isn't quite right, or it's been spotted, we all need to be empowered to make the change on that decision, or at least challenge certain decisions. So there's that cultural aspect to a lot of things, again playing into trust, but it is really this case of preparedness, or proactive defense, if you like, is the next step. We can't just sit by on a minimum compliance regulation anymore. But really empowering event. Actually, it was nicely timed, obviously, with the recent announcements.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of reflect on some of that, and I haven't been to RSA or any of the the massive US based trade shows, I guess, but I've been to InfoSec in London, and I think at those conferences you still overwhelmingly get the sense that technology will solve everything, and it's partially a vendor-led thing where people go, no, just buy our shiny gadget and everything will be better. Whereas I think the shift in conversation of what Cyber UK often enables is this more holistic approach to the challenge, and the recognition, the acknowledgement, and being quite explicit about it being a culture issue, being a governance issue, an organizational priority issue, a leadership issue, and that makes it way more complex. And you walk away and your head goes, oh my god, it's really quite a wicked problem, isn't it? But it's also a much more honest approach and an honest dismantling of the cyber challenge, which is partly, I think, also why I just love Cyber UK.
Yeah, I think it's also a little bit of a reminder, and I've said this quite a few times in these sessions, and my sort of background in law enforcement is all about that sharing of experience and knowledge. And we talked about a couple of the incident response cases that we've been involved in on our stand, didn't we? And I talk regularly about intelligence sharing communities, and yes, there's sometimes money associated with it, and there's commercial solutions and services, but there's an awful lot to be gained from that public-private partnership and working together, and actually all fighting the good fight together as well. So I think a lot of that comes out as well in the event.
It does, and I think across borders as well, right? Because you have international delegations there coming with a very clear objective to learn from the UK experience and assess whether some of what works in the UK they can take back to their own countries and replicate there, which is really nice.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the event, I think I've just heard a question pop in. I have. Abigail, do regulations such as TSA and CSRB actually help with cybersecurity? I don't know who wants to take that, Leslie or Kat. Not quite sure on those acronyms.
I can start. So for everyone who doesn't live and breathe cyber regulations, TSA, Telecom Security Act. So the minimum cybersecurity requirements that were passed for telecoms operators in the UK in 2021, I want to say, and we're still seeing the implementation of codes of practice and going through the various tiers of telco operators at the moment. CSRB, Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. Effectively, though, the UK government won't like hearing that. The implementation of NIS2, or a version of NIS2 in the UK post-Brexit, so covering cybersecurity requirements for critical national infrastructure in the UK, which is currently going through Parliament. Primary legislation is going through Parliament. We're expecting secondary legislation to be consulted on later in the year, with the view to that law becoming effective and fully entering into force in 2028. So if you wanted an example of the role of regulation and legislation in keeping up with the evolving threat and technology landscape and the speed differences, and that's probably a really good example. In terms of answering the direct question, so there's so many ways of looking at that, right? So regulations set a baseline expectation of what a government at any given point considers good practice, important practice to look like. For organizations who struggle to work out what good looks like, that's a really important baseline, because it's effectively a sort of a stamp of approval of what the expectations are, and they can therefore build their security programs on that basis. For organizations who will only ever do the bare minimum and will only ever do something because they would otherwise be fined, the enforcement of those regulations is a really important aspect, because, as we all know, if laws become kind of toothless paper tigers, to quote one of my old university professors, they're ultimately pointless, because everyone just ignores them and goes on as they meant before. The other aspect of that is what happens in terms of how organizations implement and prove their implementation of those regulations and requirements. And we've heard so many times that at the moment, particularly where organizations operate across borders and have multiple regulatory regimes to comply to, the amount of time they spend filling in forms and dealing with bureaucracy and reporting is actually quite expensive and takes time and money away from making cybersecurity improvements that would actually, lead to different outcomes. So I fundamentally believe that in the day and age that we're in, regulations are a core part of government's toolboxes in improving cyber resilience outcomes. There is probably stuff that they over-engineered now, having ignored cybersecurity for a good decade or so, and that's sort of catching up with what the regulatory framework looks like. But in terms of setting that benchmark and that baseline for organizations to know what they have to do, and then, as Alessia said, build upon that and improve their security, I think is such an important part of the world that we live in today. Sorry, you got me onto a topic that I'm really excited about, Abigail.
If I could just add a touch to that as well, I think in a very tactical basis, if you're thinking more of like an assured resilience space, or just general cyber assurance, it does enforce CSRB in particular, does enforce that evidence-based approach. And I think that's something where we'll really need to see that shift to enable us to get to that point. So where Kat has kind of outlined the different layers of organization or different layers of audiences, whether they are proactively on their journey or whether they are only doing it to match the kind of, hate to use this phrase, but the checkbox here in this, it's a case of actually enforcing it to be part of your journey from the offset, not necessarily an afterthought. So there is a huge amount of value in that shift to assured resilience, but it will be very, very interesting to see actually how that comes to play across the board and how organizations take that on going forward.
Yeah, thank you both. I'll give my 10 seconds on it. I think any of those regulations, they work in tandem with other things. It's not a silver bullet, is it? So they will help. Just look, if you look at financial services and how mature financial services is from a cybersecurity point of view, that's been driven a lot by regulation. If you look in the UK, you've got schemes like CBEST as well, which sort of, or regulation has enforced schemes like CBEST and Tiber across Europe to force organizations to test their capabilities, test their defensive posture, test their detection and response capability as well. So I think it forces behaviors that lead on to other good things as well. So yeah. I think we touched on it very briefly, and Robert, I have seen your question, particularly like you mentioned of the cyber gods, and I'll come back to it in just a moment. So, Kat, Alessia, let's start with Alessia, if that's okay. Attacks are succeeding, and I've talked a lot about opportunity and how organizations, if they reduce that opportunity, then there's going to be less attacks that are succeeding. But what did you pick up from Cyber UK, if anything, or just from general work, with it, particularly within traditional cyber assurance type activity? What do you think the biggest gaps are that organizations are picking up on at the moment?
Oh, to be honest, there's probably quite a few lenses on this I can touch upon. I think we've probably seen, if we take it as kind of like material shifts in the industry, and then versus kind of what's maybe a little bit different. I think we've all kind of seen the speed and scale of attacks, the transition to machine speed, and actually in this instance we're not necessarily prepared on the defender's perspective to respond to the speed of those attacks. And truthfully, we're all on an AI hype at this point. We're in this bubble, if we're still using that terminology, and everything is kind of emblazoned with that. But AI here is actually the enabler to pick up the weaknesses which haven't necessarily been patched, or it's something which hasn't necessarily been a core focus for a long period of time. And so AI isn't necessarily the enemy in this instance, but it is more focusing on it's opening up the gaps there in the market, and it's being positioned as, I suppose, a new threat. And that's not necessarily the case. It's more that what's new here is that we need to focus on the shield lens of AI and actually how to secure the systems themselves. So again, reinforcing that whether it's secure by design, whether it is focusing through from the initial stance and standpoint, we have that process of assurance or maturity against risks or against weaknesses as we kind of come through development processes. And I think we really do see a huge shift, more and more pressure actually coming into supply chains and identity now, mainly because we've seen it again in kind of the very recent public attacks, but that they're becoming a primary attack vector rather than something which is a secondary thought. And actually at this point, it's that, I suppose, the initial access vector, which is something of scale and something which is really quite concerning.
Yeah, I'm glad my crystal ball back in December was right when I talked about identity and being the new front line. But here we go, we're in that world. Let's jump to one of the questions from the audience, if that's okay. Robert, I'm going to read it out just in case Kat and Alessia can't see it. But speakers have said already we need to get back to the basics, and we've been hearing this message for well over 20 years. Robert, you've been in this industry a bit longer than I have. How do the panel suggest that we get it right this time? Is it going to be a case of more regulation, more publicity, more pain, or do we simply pray to the cyber gods? Yes, good question. I like the cyber gods angle because I'm not quite sure what else we need to do. Kat, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on this.
I'm going to say all of the above, probably. I mean, and part of that goes, there's not going to be a silver bullet or a panacea or a simple solution to that. I think we've got better at using other levers to encourage investment in cyber basics, whether that's procurement criteria, setting expectations that, I don't know, an organization does have multi-factor authentication or passkeys, or whatever the current on vogue technology is installed. I think we got better at least encouraging the production of more secure by design technology that avoids the need for end user decisions and end user action to get the basics right. And I think we probably got better at proving the efficacy of some of those controls and being able to say to someone, if you actually do this, whatever this might be, we know and we have hard data to prove that the likelihood of you falling victim to a common attack or you suffering catastrophic losses as a result of an attack will be this. I think not just telling people, oh, just trust us, we know this guidance is good, but having the actual evidence to base to back that up, I think has improved or has sort of created different kind of incentive structures that hopefully will shimmy people along the way, which, you know, is a more sophisticated answer than more sophisticated way of saying, we just keep praying to the cyber gods and hope for the best kind of thing.
I think from my point of view, I mean, it's going to be slightly biased, but it has to be threat-led. You know, these conversations are threat-led now, and talking about the foundations and getting the basics right. I think probably over the last 20 years, it's just been a case of fatigue, you know, hearing this message over and over again, oh, we've got to get the basics right. Well, so what if you don't? And now we're starting to see the impact of the so what, aren't we? You know, we're starting to see these big organizations getting popped, not because of a fancy new zero day, but because these basics that we've been talking about for 20 years are the things that are leading to those breaches. And Kat, you know, you're absolutely right. Some of that risk quantification stuff, you know, if we put in control A, what is that financial impact? And I think it has to be a little bit of that conversation to the board as well, and put in cyber in that business continuity type language, as opposed to it being something separate. You know, cyber can't be a separate thing within the risk register. You know, it has to be part of the conversation. This is how you continue to operate as a business, not because of the cyber thing. It's just it's disruption as usual. You know, you just have to get on with it and build it into those conversations. Alessia, I don't know if you had any thoughts. Oh, sorry, Kat, no, even more thoughts.
Even more thoughts. Sorry, yeah. I think the other thing is, and again, you know, sorry, NCSC fangirl here, but the work that they've done around researching and understanding the socio-technical aspects of some of their guidance. So taking passwords, for example, we went from the kind of slightly weird password guidance of letters and numbers and what have you to the use 3 random words.
Yeah.
They have then undertaken implementation research to go a lot of kind of online services, and the parameters they set don't actually allow for 3 random words to be put in as your password. And I think we've all had that frustration where we just go, fuck's sake, why do I need an exclamation mark and a number? And you resort back to the more predictable kind of password through the parameters that are being forced. So as technology has evolved, there's been this shift in thinking of the passkeys, and move to passkeys was announced at Cyber UK. But I think that's another positive thing of evolving what getting the basics right means, and moving with technology and the socio-technical aspects of it to make it almost as concrete as possible for people rather than saying just have better passwords. And we've evolved to implement passkeys, and this is how you do it now. So I think that's another positive shift, and one we should probably keep thinking about as we look at what the basics mean and how that evolves as, you know, technology advances and we understand better what drives behaviors.
Yeah. A passion coming out of Cat before the watershed as well there. I don't know if anyone picked up on that.
Sorry.
Alessia, did you have anything on that one just before we move on?
Just a tiny bit of addition there. I think you've covered a huge amount, but just in terms of actually stress testing the controls, looking at and looking and understanding, I suppose, from more of a visibility perspective of actually what does your attack surface incorporate at a very, you know, I'm talking at a very tactical level here, but it's a case of running simulations and understanding actually, can we respond to this in real life? Is this something that if this were to happen, can we respond? Can we recover? And actually, what's the process with that? And it falls into your people primarily, and how they respond.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, both. Right, how are we doing for time? I don't know if people can give a thumbs up or things like that, if they're happy for us to crack on for a little bit longer or not. But we might start wrapping up because I appreciate everyone probably wants to go and have their dinner and pick up the kids from school and stuff like that. So let's just go to the last question. So just for people who have put questions in, Steve, Ellie, probably won't have time to get to those today, but I'll see if I can answer them in writing in the email wrap up to you, if that's okay. And Adam says loves Kat's passion on the subject. She gets a pass. So yeah, maybe we could do like that drunk histories type version of cyber threat landscape at some point in a sort of post 9 o'clock webinar. That would be interesting. Not sure we'll get that through marketing. So last question from me, I guess, from a panel point of view then, Kat, Alessia, and back to the sort of Cyber UK thing. So if, one hell of a question this, I'm sorry, if organisations are listening to this now or wanted to know what came out of Cyber UK, what's one thing, if you were to wrap it all up into one beautiful package, what one thing should organisations be doing in the next 90 days? Let's go with 90 days, and what should they be focusing on straight off the bat, and what's going to go horribly wrong for them if they ignore it?
We should go first.
I'm going to say, I think heed the warning that board leadership or senior executive leadership is fundamentally important, and that is something that organizations will be judged on by governments, by regulators, by the NCSC. So if you are a board member, one, go hug your CISO, and two, ask your CISO what your actual cyber resilience plan looks like and when it's last been exercised. And if it hasn't been, give your CISO the budget to exercise it, like tomorrow. And then really understand how your team, your organization would react under pressure. And there is all sorts of, clever ways by which you can simulate a real incident. And, Matt will come in and say, of course there is threat-led penetration testing, there is threat-led adversary simulation stuff that is there, but really understanding how you will fare under pressure, and then having the confidence to answer anyone who will ask you how seriously you're treating your cyber program, I think is probably the top advice.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kat. Alessia?
I think for me, I'm going to be cheeky. I'm going to echo Kat's advice and add a little bit extra. I think it's a case of trying to shift the mindset. Cybersecurity as a concept is a board level priority, and it should be something that they are concerned with. And to have and shift their mindset from compliance equaling security, because there's currently the assumption that meeting the minimum standard is acceptable. And I think truthfully, we've all understood and seen that it's not necessarily the case. And so we can't necessarily delegate cyber resilience. We can't delegate or shouldn't be delegating that approach. And so having the reality check that it is a board level priority, there should be investment, and it should be a case of proactive defense or proactive security to understand actually what are we doing now here today? Does this impact or does it change if I make said change into my environments or my applications or infrastructure? And truthfully, let it be a very tactical effort, and it comes in at every part of the journey, regardless of what you're developing, regardless of what you're working on. It should be through kind of the DNA of every portion of your business. Truthfully, it is one of those foundational assets. So and emphasize is probably my key word there. Emphasize to colleagues and teams and make everyone aware that that is actually truly the principle of where cybersecurity should sit.
Fab, thank you. And my takeaway is if Kat Sommer invites you for dinner, think twice before going to do it. Right, Kat, Alessia, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it was last minute for you both, but I think listening to some of the questions and the responses, that'll be really, really useful for the listeners and the audience today. So thank you very much for joining.
Pleasure.
That leaves me to do my closing bits and bobs. Just a general reminder that we do have our annual threat reports still available. That's on our website. Go and grab yourself a copy today. Includes some of Matt's crystal ball bits for the year, and as well as some of the strategic priorities that organizations should ideally be focusing on, or at least thinking about during the course of the year. Little plug as well for Kat and her team. So every now and then they produce something called the Cyber Policy Radar, which I've shared a few times in these sessions. The latest edition, edition 5, is out now, and there's a link in the slides for that as well. Next webinar, I'll probably go back to normal format unless I have a brainwave the first thing in the morning and drag some guests in. It's going to be Tuesday, 26th of May, usual time, 1600 hours BST. Either way, I will see you there. Hopefully that's been really, really useful for you. Sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions. I'll do my best to respond to those in writing for you, or at least Alessia and Kat and I can do that. But as always, thank you very much for joining. Hopefully see you again in about a month's time. Take care, everyone.